I'm literally going to treat you guys like Forest Service employees. We're going to take you through the session. So what I need you to do is take one of your pieces of government ID and hold it in one hand or another, everybody. Put your other hand up and repeat after me. I promise for the next 2.5 hours to be a pretend Forest Service employee. Okay, ready to go. All right. Okay, so this training session that I'm taking you through, we've been doing something along these lines, pretty much identical to this, although we tweaked it just a little bit when we came out with the interim final directive, so the content changed a little. But we've been doing this training session for at least 5 or 6 years and probably a little longer with basically almost the same PowerPoint. Additionally, because of demand from the Forest Service, but also comments from the Horsemen and others saying you need to get everybody in your agency up to speed on this. We've really beefed up the training efforts, and so normally we've done this in a classroom setting, and so it's kind of limited how often we can get people together and get trainers out there, et cetera, et cetera. And so this year we started doing online training sessions, which is really nice, and we've had great participation where 40 or 50 people will sit at their computer, call in, listen to a toll-free number, and basically listen to me talk and take them through this. And we've been doing quite a bit of that. Last week, we'll see how this turns out, it was recorded, and so we're going to be able to provide it via a web link where anybody on demand can just go, I don't have anything else to do on this Friday night. I want to listen to Jamie go through this stuff. And so that's going to be available real soon on our internal website, and as soon as our external website comes back up, which I'll talk about, we want to get it posted there as well. So I think that'll help. Another neat piece with that is, and you'll see as we go through this, it's good and effective to train our trail managers and trail technicians and engineers, but it is just as important to have our district rangers and line officers and decision makers up to speed on this, and we're getting more and more rangers participating in the training, which is really a good sign, we think. So,
Jamie, is there any requirement for line officers to attend? I mean, did the chief say you're going to go?
That's a really good question, and no, there's no requirement. I'm trying to encourage, but I just actually was discussing that with Joel this morning, so I think that's a great suggestion for you guys. Don't say I said that. So, the Forest Service Trail Fundamentals, they include 5 basic concepts, but they really are important concepts and cornerstones of effective trail planning, management, location design, maintenance and construction, and then follow-up condition assessments. Here's the 5 fundamentals plus an extra. So the 5 fundamentals are, and they sound like just plain English, pretty intuitive words, but a couple of them really you have to stop and make sure that our folks clearly understand them and are applying them correctly. There's trail type, trail class, managed use, designed use, and design parameters. Those are the 5 fundamentals. And in your book, on pages 1 through 4, most of the stuff that I'm going to go over each one. You're going to be an expert in this by the time we're done. Without too much pain, it's pretty effortless, I think. Pages 1 through 4 provide the definitions, business rules for how we apply them, etc. So those are in your book. And then this last one, CHASM, isn't really a fundamental, but it's a really important associated tool that we use, so I always like to go over that as well. So in the mid to late 90s, all across the agency, not just in trails, Congress was asking the Forest Service, the Park Service, the BLM, what's the condition of your infrastructure? How are your budgets running? How much money would it take to bring everything up to speed? And the different agencies had different ways of reporting that and trying to figure it out. But we were all kind of in a world of hurt, really, because nobody had a good, credible, consistent way to identify, one, the inventory with credibility and consistency, and then say, two, this is how much money it would cost to bring it all up to standard. And in the case of trails and campgrounds, for example, we had a couple of embarrassments where, okay, how many campgrounds do you have, and how many miles of trail do you have? And from different parts of the country, we're getting conflicting answers. And that's just one example. And so the chief at the time put out a directive throughout the Forest Service and all program areas and said, we're going to get it together. And we need good, credible inventory and cost data. And so that started in the late 1990s. And then by 2000, as I mentioned, in the case of trails, we put together this national team, and that's what we've been working on. And we've actually come a long way. And so to do that, the effort involved two prongs, these two bullets. First was to just completely overhaul our corporate database for trails, and it's called INFRA. It's an Oracle database, and if anyone's into databases, it's cutting edge. It's pretty darn neat, and you can track what we call tabular information, where you type, the trail is this long, and it's a class 3, and it starts at the junction of road whatever, and it's in good condition. So you can type descriptive information, but it's also fully linked with a GIS spatial database. So we can take that tabular information and apply it and make, provide it in a spatial setting. So we can provide maps. Give me a map on this district that shows all the class 3 trails that are managed for pack and saddle. So it's pretty neat. And so that's what INFRA can do, which is our database. And then the second piece here is we needed to feed the database. And so we developed a standardized approach to go out and do condition assessments. And we've put a concerted effort into training folks to systematically go out and identify what's on the trail, how long is it, how wide is it compared to how long and wide it should be, and what do we have for structures, for bridges, for puncheon, for signs, what kind of condition are they in, and then prescribe what it would take to bring it back to standard. Replace the sign, replace 17 feet of a puncheon, that type of thing, and then we can get standardized costing. So that emphasis went on in the early 2000s, right in there. The objectives, unlike previous efforts like this, we turned the objectives on their head, because prior to that, I don't know if you guys remember when we had all these reporting requirements. Quite often, you're just where it's really happening at the district level, and Washington will go, well, we need to know something. And so it was a number for upward reporting for Washington to send to Congress, and so you go, okay, we're really busy, give them a number and get back to doing the real stuff. So we spun this on its head and said, let's come up with tools that are useful for local management. And then from that we'll have good data, and the offshoot will be, oh yeah, there will be good numbers for Washington. And we stuck to that, and we think that we do really have some tools, and you'll see as we go through, and they're being used all over the agency for local management in a lot of ways. So how do we go about doing this? Well, decided that we should start from kind of a common point of reference and tie together several pieces that were floating around out there, a lot of them disconnected, some more so than others. And these pieces included things like the Forest Service Manual and the Forest Service Handbook. That's that acronym there, FSM, FSH. In the Manual and Handbook, which has been around for a long, long time, there were lots of long-standing definitions, terminology, direction. A lot of it was and still is really important to us and really helpful. Some of it was a little more dated, and we had also, along the way, identified some other pieces that kind of, duplicated and were replacing it, but they had, that direction hadn't come into the manual and handbook. So let's bring forward the effective pieces of the manual and handbook, update it as need be, and go forward, which you guys have been instrumental in helping kick that along, and that's been good. Another piece were the Forest Service standard drawings and specifications. Has anybody seen our drawings and specs? Our engineers use them, contractors use them. For all the standard types of constructed features we build on trails, turnpike, puncheon, bridges, signs, switchbacks. We've got standardized drawings and construction specs, and other agencies can pull them off of a public website and use them as guidance to go out and their blueprints basically to go out and construct or maintain trails. And actually, I want to mention in the back of your book, the last 2 pages, There are several references, including the reference for the standard drawings and specs. So as part of this process, we brought forward the standard drawings and specs, but we've massively updated them because they were missing a lot of some of the newer construction techniques, and so those are currently being updated, and we hope they'll be out for publication within about a year. And if I had wireless, I could click on these links and show them to you, but can't do that for now. Similarly, what we call business management rules, and so rules of thumb about how we apply some of these concepts. Bring forward the ones that make sense, get rid of the ones that are obsolete, and develop new ones. But as, like this is an example of get them down in writing, be consistent, and train folks so that they're applied consistently. Incorporate the GIS spatial data. As I mentioned, we didn't get too far into data before it was really apparent. It's apparent with trails and with roads. You just can't talk data on roads or trails without doing spatial because they're linear, and right away it just helps to see things on maps. And when you're talking about miles of this and doing comparisons. Deferred maintenance protocols. Since 1999, we've been under a requirement, most agencies have that manage federal lands, under a requirement to go out and systematically go out and assess, do a condition assessment on a certain percentage of our roads, trails, buildings, and then basically to kind of keep tabs and have a current inventory. It's part of that directive coming from the chief a few years before that. What's the inventory, what's the condition, and how much will it cost to bring it up to standards? So consistently bringing that into this whole effort. And then finally, this thing that's got an acronym, it's called FTDS, the Federal Trail Data Standards, and these were coming into play at about the same time, and the four federal agencies who manage trails, the Park Service, the BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Forest Service, we all had our own data sets and terminology, and we kind of said, you know, a lot of these trails, the long distance trails, the Pacific Crest, the Continental Divide, etc., they go over all sorts of jurisdictions, and wouldn't it be nice if there was at least a common set of a piece of language where we talked about things consistently, and then we could have maps that run consistently all the way across. And so that's been a big effort, and I've been the rep for the Forest Service in that effort, and boy, if you want to see turfy people, get agency people and their data. It's pretty turfy, but it's been a long process that has been really productive. And so basically, out of all the things all these agencies describe and all the data they track, we ended up landing on a set of about 40 or 45 individual pieces of terminology, data attributes that we're all agreeing we're going to call a spade, we're going to call Trail Class 1, Trail Class 1, and talk consistently between all those agencies. And it's now had spin-off effects where these are now being published. They're in just the final stages of being published by the Federal Geographic Data Committee as FGDC standards, and those are out for notice and comment, and you guys did comment on those. And then those will be out soon, and several states have started adopting these. So I see it, as we go through, I think you'll see what I'm talking about. I see it as another step forward in terms of, at least for this core set of information, everybody playing nice and being able to use the same language. And if you're interested in those federal trail data standards, there's kind of just a synopsis sheet on page 68 and 69 in your book, and it kind of gives the first page there, gives you kind of a status update on what the deal is. But if you flip to the back side, you'll see a listing of what we're talking about, what the data attributes are. It's in the very back of your book, like second to last page or so. Sheet like this that says FTDS, that lists all the pieces of information that we've now consistently defined, and we're trying to implement them across all four of those federal agencies. So start from a common point of reference and integrate, link all these pieces. So in terms of starting from a common point of reference, it didn't take long before this concept of TMOs, or trail management objectives, surfaced. And we've got lots of folks in our agency who, when they learn about TMOs, they go, well, this isn't rocket science, and it's not anything new. And it really isn't, because as we go through this, you'll see that the concepts that are included in TMOs have been around forever. I mean, you pretty much can't manage a trail or a trail system if you're not thinking about these things one way or another, although you might not call them these same things. And our problem is we weren't all documenting them. Quite more often than not, they were in the trail guy's head, and then when the trail guy retired, it all walked out the door, and we didn't know that. And you guys probably have experienced that when you lose your long-term local trail guide. It's like that knowledge goes out the door. So TMOs were the common point of reference that we sense that they've become just so important to us, and you'll see why in just a sec. So TMOs are a really solid foundation, and you'll see this for trail management, planning, design, construction, maintenance, etc. They also work really well to take you through the trail fundamentals. So what you want to do is take the single TMO sheet, because I know you definitely cannot see this thing, and kind of keep that handy, and we're going to walk through the various pieces. I'm going to train you on how to do a TMO, populate a TMO, as we say, as we go through. So if you're looking on the front of your TMO sheet, it says up at the top, tracks, trail management objectives. It does not say travel management strategies. That's the backside. So if you're on the front, you'll see that that this top piece is basically just a trail definition block. And we have a requirement that within the Forest Service that there's a TMO form populated for every National Forest System trail. We have the requirement, but we don't have a deadline. Because this is in some places it's pretty easy to get these done, and a lot of them are already documented. In other places, it gets caught up in training people, but also a lot of our forests are in the midst of travel management planning. So do they do this now, or do they wait until they're at the end of that and then document? So with TMOs, go ahead.
Yeah, you're going to need to use microphones.
Okay. Okay, I'll just go back and forth is what I'll do. Okay, ooh. You know what? Tethered.
Don't tell the safety officer. No.
Okay, so is that better? I feel like I'm echoing. So TMOs, this top piece is the trail definition block. And so just simplistically, let's not overthink it. You go, okay, I've got this and I'm supposed to fill one out for my trail. So think of your trail, and basically we provide step-by-step instructions, and they start, let me tell you, I don't think I can do this and maneuver all this stuff. No, I'm not going to be tethered. I'll take you through and teach you how to fill out a TMO, but what we tell our folks, and if we had longer, I'd put you through a little exercise where you actually create one, and we did that at the Missoula session last fall. But beginning on page 11, there's step-by-step instructions, and so we tell our Forest Service folks, for every single data field here, before you put anything in there, read the instructions and consistently get the right piece of information in there. So this top block, switch. Does that work? Can you guys hear me? No. Does that work?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, so this top block is the trail definition block. And if you look at it, it's pretty obvious, what region is the trail in, what forest, what district. We use a certain numerical code to identify that. Trail name, trail number. Now, it's interesting, getting started through this, we realize we have thousands and thousands of trails. We have 150,000 some miles of trail, but when we started this, we didn't even know that. And I don't know how many of you remember Jim Miller. He was our Washington Office program manager before Jonathan Stevens, and he would get hold of me and go, "Quick, I need to tell Congress how many miles we have," and we didn't know. Well, now we at least think we know based on current data. So trail name and trail number, and then just kind of a place where you can write down the beginning termini and the ending termini just in common English. And so, it might be Smith Ridge Trail number 476, but it's really helpful to say, it starts at the junction of roads such and such, where it hits the ridge at the 6.2 mile mark, or whatever. And the same with the ending termini. Under where it says trail inventory length, that's how long, what's the official length of that trail? Now, with all the trails we have in the country, and the way some of them have just seemed like they've always been there, plus we're adding trails, you'll go, well, the trail's, 6.28 miles long. Okay, good. Are we sure that, are we confident in that? How do you know it's 6.28 miles long? And so over here to the right, we identify the mileage source, and that is an indicator, depending on what the mileage source is, that's an indicator of how confident we are in that length. And so you can see in the instructions, I think if the mileage source is with a wheel, if somebody actually went out and walked the thing and measured it, we're pretty confident in that length, and so I think we put it to the 3rd decimal place or something. It's in the instructions. Whereas if it's with a GPS unit, a little less confident. If somebody just ran a planimeter around a map, okay, well the number's better than nothing. Or if it's 6.28 miles and we don't know where that number came from, and believe me, that exists all over our agency. It's unknown. And you go, how could that happen? Well, like when I went to the Avery Ranger District, it's like, I got this book, it's called the Trail Management Plan, had 800 miles of trail in it, and it said the trail was 6.28 miles long. Okay, don't know where that number came from, but that's the number. So we're trying to edge up that scale as we go, but that's kind of the basic definition.
Just detail, but what determines which end of the trail is the beginning and which is the end? Yeah,
that's a really good question. And you know, common sense, whatever works for the local managers, and kind of, it depends. Is there more of a predominant trailhead? Is the flow of traffic tend to go one way or the other? And sometimes it's obvious, and sometimes it's like, no, there's 2 major trailheads, and so just pick one. What we're able to do when we go out and do condition surveys now, and go out and wheel, is we can the tools can flip the mile posting for us. But basically, somebody's just got to make a choice and pick the end. Now, on our long distance trails, we try to set up some protocols. And so like on the Pacific Crest Trail, for example, in general, they measure that trail from south going north. And even though, and they restart the measurements every time it enters another forest. So basically, coming in from the south end of the forest, milepost 00, all the way up, and sometimes it's going to be heading south, but when it finally leaves, that's milepost 472. Next forest, milepost 0, going north. So we kind of just, each of the trails set up a protocol. Yeah, so just kind of, and there's not really a right or wrong way, but that's some of the stuff that we've been trying to work out through the agency.
Just one question.
Sure, thanks.
Regarding the database you have the ability to measure the GPS locations from the database without doing it on the ground?
Okay, so tell me again.
You have an orthophone base map where the trail is located. You have a program that someone can go through and trace that trail. Yeah,
we definitely can do that. And that's where if we say that that would be under map, under the map accuracy, if we're just pulling it off of a GIS spatial layer. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can definitely do that. Yeah.
That is the most accurate.
Well, no, actually we found in our Technology and Development Center, the one there in Missoula, has done some comparative research for us, and actually the most accurate measurement we can get on a trail is to go out and wheel it. Now you have to have somebody who's not like doing this with the wheel and flopping it around and stuff, but it's even more accurate than using GPS with a satellite. It's the most accurate we can get. So we're working towards that, but that's labor intensive.
How about the stream method?
Well, it's probably right up there. Yeah, or a chain. Yeah, definitely. Just a literal measurement method. Yeah. Okay, so that's the basic definition.
One of the forests that I represent, which is in Region 2, I have a complete inventory of all the trails on the forest, about 1,300 miles. Can I assume, and they showed the main trail and the mileage, can we assume those mileages are right and use those existing mileages? They've already been determined. This was done back in 2004 when this was done.
I probably can't answer that, but if you talk to the local person, they'll tell you if that's their most current, accurate set of data. What we're trying to have everybody abide by is, if it's not in the national database, it doesn't exist, so everybody, like the trail is not recognized for budget or other purposes, so they're all working on that, and believe me, we have a way to go. But then getting it into the database includes getting the accurate mileage, and I'm sure that we've kind of got discrepancy all over the place, but that's what we're working towards. So I would take it to the local district ranger and go, here's my list, how's this compare with the current, and they can pull right out of the current database a report for you, and we could do some comparisons. So, any other questions there? Okay, so that's the definition block, which brings up this word definition. And so just so that you have it in case you need it for future reference, if you will turn to page 23 of your book, let's go over the Forest Service's official definitions of a trail. I don't know if I would think that you might have some instances where you might need this. We unfortunately need to use it a lot, and I say that because I'm not that fond of these definitions, but if you look at the bottom half of the page, I like that definition better. I talked about the interagency data standards that all the feds are using, and each agency has their official definition of a trail. So, of course, we couldn't get it all together. So what we did is we came up with this umbrella definition that covers all of those definitions. And I think this is a pretty decent definition. Bottom half of page 23, a trail is a linear route managed for human-powered stock or OHV forms of transportation or for historic or heritage values, in the case of the historic trails. I mean, that to me is pretty intuitive, straight up. And actually, a lot of folks like that definition. That definition, ironically, is based on the Forest Service's old definition of a trail, which was pretty straight up. But then we got into the travel management rule, which is now in the Code of Federal Regulations. And I was not involved in this, and I'll try not to take pot shots, but the Forest Service's definition of a trail got rewritten, and it's now in law. So as much as people complain, including me, it's not getting changed too easily. So the agency's definition of a trail is on the top half of page 23, and it's a three-tiered definition. So the word trail, according to the Forest Service, is defined by a route. It's a route that's 50 inches or less in width, okay, a narrow route, or a route that's over 50 inches in width, okay, that's identified and managed as a trail. So I don't know if we have any teachers or English majors amongst us, but whatever. That's the definition of a trail. And then a forest trail builds on that definition. And so a forest trail is a trail that's wholly or partly within or adjacent to and serving the National Forest System that the Forest Service determines is necessary for the protection, administration, and utilization of the National Forest System and the use and development of its resources. Okay, so that's saying we know what a trail is, and so a legitimate forest trail is a trail that fills that purpose. And then finally, an NFST, or a National Forest System trail, which are all the trails that we recognize in our inventory, falls under this final definition, which says a National Forest System trail is a forest trail. It's any forest trail, except for a forest trail that's been authorized by a legally held right-of-way that somebody else has the jurisdiction for. So that's kind of the convoluted Forest Service definitions of a trail, but in case you need them, there they are. Any questions on the definition of a trail? Okay. All right. So that's the top part of the TMO form. And if you move down to the second part, kind of the middle of that first page, we're right under that subheading that says design use objectives. And that heading is pretty helpful. A lot of times when real experienced folks actually get way down in the weeds filling out TMOs, you kind of come up for air and you go, am I supposed to be writing down the current condition of the trail, or am I supposed to be writing down the intended condition of the trail? Well, that's why that says design use objectives. That's why these are called TMOs, trail management objectives. It's the management intent for the trail, which may or may not match what's on the ground. In good cases, it matches what's on the ground. In cases where we've got serious deferred maintenance, it doesn't necessarily match. And I know that's been a question with this group as well. So we're trying very consistently, and actually we've got that in our manual spelled out now in plain English, that these are the trail management objectives, which may or may not match the current condition. Okay, so this first block right there, highlighted kind of in grayish blue, we come to the first trail fundamental, which is trail type. And so trail type, this was a big paradigm shift for us several years ago. Trail type is a basic category that reflects the predominant trail surface and the general mode of travel accommodated by the trail. So let's look at it. We've got 3 trail types. We've got standard terra trail, snow trail, and water trail. And so the way they're defined is a standard terra trail. It's a trail where the predominant foundation is earth or ground. and it's designed and managed to accommodate ground-based trail use. So that's what kind of informally folks think of as a summer trail, except for if you live in Alaska maybe. But trails that accommodate, mountain bikes, stock, hikers, what else? ATVs, motorcycles, those types of things. Horses, I think I said. A snow trail, similarly. Predominant foundation is snow or ice, and it's designed and managed to accommodate snow-based use like skiing, snowshoeing, and snowmobiling, and dog sledding. Excellent. And it does not. This last bullet is a qualifier for the forests that we have. Some forests have designated snow play areas or snow corridors, especially where snow machines are allowed to go, but it's not a designated trail. So it's not an NFST, a National Forest System trail. So we're trying to get people to consistently understand that, those kind of, you can go in there and do whatever you do. That's not a trail, and it shouldn't be showing up in the inventory. And somebody mentioned dog sleds, which reminds me of the Iditarod. This top bullet used to just say that the predominant foundation is snow, until I was working on the Iditarod, and folks up there, especially north of Anchorage, said, snow doesn't cut it because hundreds of miles of the Iditarod run on rivers, so it's ice, so ice got added. There's a little side note for you. Think of that with your pen, Dennis. And then the third type is water trails. And on water trails, the predominant foundation is water, obviously designed and managed to accommodate water-based trail use, includes both, motorized and non-motorized or both. And then a water trail might include a portage segment. And so if you think of up in the Boundary Waters canoe area where you know there's a route that goes from point A to point B, and you're going to get in your canoe, go do this, get out, go over a portage, keep going. That portage overland segment is inventoried as part of the whole, 32-mile trail. The Forest Service doesn't have very many miles of actual water trail. We have a lot of whitewater, river opportunities, and I had a question last week again from someone in the Forest Service saying, "Are my river running?" No, that's not a National Forest System trail. So we're trying to clean up that part of the inventory as well. Where we tend to have a good chunk of water trails are down in the southeast, where there's some trails through swamplands where they actually machete and keep a path clear, I guess, from the crocodiles and the vines and things. And so that's a trail that's maintained, and there's a cost, and there's standards to maintain it. Now, this was the paradigm shift I was talking about. There's only one trail type per trail. And so for years prior to 2000, when we would get these national calls for inventory, if you have a standard terra trail and you have a snow trail, you run it as a snow trail in the winter, half of our units would call that the same trail and go, well, I have, 18 miles of trail. Half of the other units would say, well, I've got a standard terra trail and I've got a snow trail, and so they'd report 36 miles. And so what we did is we cleaned this up and said, okay, anytime you're talking about a specific trail, it's one or the other. Pick a trail type, okay? And so in that example where I talked about a standard terra trail and 6 feet above it, sometimes in the winter, there's another trail which may exactly match the template, or it might veer off through a meadow here and there. There's another route. What identifying them by trail type lets us do is it lets managers identify what's needed to maintain each one to standard. And so like maybe on the snow trail, maybe there's a grooming cost or putting in snow poles or not. And it also lets managers make some decisions. So maybe they might decide that if the standard terra trail is the most heavily used and it's their priority route of the two, that they're going to maintain that thing 80% to standard and put their money and their effort and their volunteers there. And maybe because of budget choices, they're going to say, well, the snow trail, we're just going to take care of the critical standards, but that's all we can afford to do. So it's been a pretty effective tool to use trail types. A question that always comes up with this bit about trail types is, well, aren't you duplicating miles? What about overlap? And so the way we address that is if we've got two trail types that are basically on the same route, and this also holds true when we've got a trail running on top of a road. A lot of times we'll have a road that we manage in the summer as a road, and in the winter we close the road and manage it as a snow trail. Well, we identify each route with its own name and number, and it's inventoried separately, separate miles, and then we've got the capacity within the database to be able to sort it out. So if we need to filter it out and get the actual literal on-the-ground miles, we can do that. But when we report to Congress that we have 150-some thousand miles of trail, we're including all of the trails and then the cost to maintain those. And when we cost them, we just don't duplicate the costing between them.
So there is no summer maintenance trail fund and a winter?
No, it's all one pot. Now, they might split it up as, not when it comes out of the Washington office, it's all the same thing. And then as it comes down, it might get split up, but actually I'm not familiar with anywhere that it has. Yeah, more of a local decision. So that gets us through the first fundamental, which is trail type. Are there any questions on trail type? Okay, so I forgot to tell you that there's going to be tests throughout the training. So who can tell me the 3 trail types without looking down?
Snow.
Well, you're Forest Service. Okay, but you get a prize anyway, so.
I get a prize.
You get a prize. Let me set this down.
Yeah.
It's a high-quality prize. It's a smoky luggage tag.
Oh, good deal. Thank you.
Good student. Okay, so moving right along. So we're still on the front sheet of your TMO form, and the next one is trail class, which is it's a big deal. And there's probably 2 of these fundamentals that to me are the most essential that we drive home and that folks clearly understand, because for some reason it's hard for folks to get their head around these and consistently implement them. So we're really focusing on both of these, trail class and managed use. So trail class is defined as basically the prescribed scale of development of a trail. So it's the development scale of a trail, ranging from minimally developed all the way up to fully developed. And so it's the prescribed scale of development representing the intended design and management standards for the trail. So again, not necessarily what's out there, but what the management intent is for the trail. How developed is the thing supposed to be? Is the vision that this is a challenging goat trail, or is the vision that this is a pretty easy trail that can accommodate a lot of people? What's the plan? And then you'll see also here that this last word, we reference standards. And so in the late 90s, there was a pretty good effort within the Forest Service to identify management standards for trails. And that took a while, but once we got that done, they've been locked and frozen, which is good, because if they change, it could probably, the ripple effect could be big. But just for reference, you've got a copy of the National Quality Standards in your book, and those just went into the manual with this latest revision as well, and they're on page 25, 26. And if you turn to page 26 in particular, 25 is kind of an overview of the standards. We've got standards now identified for trails and developed rec sites, and I think heritage sites, several sets of wilderness. But the National Quality Standards for Trails, which are on page 26, you can see they're broken into key measures. And so there's a key measure of health and cleanliness, resource setting, that's how compatible is the trail within the setting. Is it negatively affecting the setting, or the setting negatively affecting the experience we're trying to provide on the trail? There's a key measure dealing with safety and security, a key measure dealing with responsiveness to the public. And then the last one, which is pretty loaded, is condition of facilities. And under condition of facilities, you can see we've got a breakout for defining what it would mean to do annual or routine maintenance that keeps the trail to standard, deferred maintenance, and capital improvement. And within our agency, trying to get people lined up behind those 3 terms and consistently implement those is still an ongoing thing. And we've been working on that for a long, long time. But I think it was in 1998 or 99, the chief put out a letter. And you've got the letter, if you're really into that kind of detail, it's back on page 63, trying to rein in this agency and go, hey, when we say deferred maintenance, here's what we mean. When we say capital improvement, here's what we mean. So it might be more detail than you want, but if you need it for reference. And actually, we're insisting that our local units use this consistently, so that when we report to Congress, we've got however many $1 million in backlog or deferred maintenance, we're identifying it consistently. So that's the definition of trail class. And so trail class reflects, like I said, the management intent for a trail based on the land management plan or other related direction. And in the manual and handbook, it gets a little bit more specific. But basically, what we're saying is, okay, so trail class, the development scale reflects the management intent for the trail based on what? Well, for the Forest Service, the starting point is always the forest plan. So whatever the forest plan said, it definitely needs to reflect that. In lots of cases, the forest plan doesn't say very much that's very helpful or very specific about trails, especially the old plans. But at least it can get us started. Like it can say this area is going to be open to motorized or open to mixed, or this is going to be a semi-primitive area managed for that type of an experience. Then the next planning layer that tends to come into play are these travel management plans, which talk specifically about these routes for motorized, non-motorized, etc. There can also be site-specific NEPA decisions, which can get pretty specific about what is intended on a trail. And then there's also kind of a catch-all phrase that's included in the manual that says, and other related direction. And that really is kind of a catch-all because lots and lots of our trails are just there. They were built, they're either game trails that have been adopted over the decades and have long been used as trails now, or they were fire trails, and they're there. And so it's like, well, there was never a NEPA decision saying this was going to be managed at XYZ level. So some of it is kind of the grandfathered in. If there's not any other written direction, then that would be considered the related direction. And to kind of distill that out, and I know that's where, in a lot of cases, the rubber meets the road because we're finally writing this stuff down. We go back to the line officer, which is the district ranger. And rangers tend to move through, and so they rely on their local folks who've been there, and also the folks who know the trails the best, which quite often are our partners who've been there a lot longer than Forest Service folks. So I think that's a good piece of information to be aware of and to use as you work, with local district offices to kind of make sure that you feel like, or to provide input that, this is what my understanding of the management intent for that trail has always been. Trail class takes into account things like the managed use, user preferences, historic use of the trail, settings, sensitive resources, and other management activities. Okay, so a couple business rules. On any given trail or segment of trail, there's only one trail class identified. These trail classes are kind of broad brush. They're not perfectly specific, but they reflect typical scenarios of a combined set of factors, and we'll look at those. And deviations can occur for any factor. So you can have an exception. These are general rules of thumb, and you can have an exception. And what we tell folks is, look at these 5 trail classes and pick the one that most closely matches the management intent of the trail. So if you want to turn to page 27, let's just do an overview of the trail classes. I can get, where's my nose? There it is. Okay, so hang on a second. So let me scooch this up just a bit. The top of the trail class matrix basically reiterates what I was just saying, the basic business rules. Oh, thanks. We're into it 1 hour. So I think we'll get through trail class and we'll probably take a quick break. So the top of the trail class matrix reiterates what I just said. So for any given stretch of trail, you got to pick one. Pick what trail class reflects the management intent. And there can be deviations or exceptions. Just pick the one that most closely matches the trail class. I'm going to scroll down here. Okay, so the way that the trail class matrix is laid out, and all 4 of the federal agencies are using the trail classes. You can see trail class 1 through 5 is arranged in a spectrum left to right. And trail class 1 are the GOAT trails, as we call them, the minimally developed, almost non-developed trails. And then you go up through the spectrum until you get to class 5, which are fully developed. And class 5 are the highest end, the most developed trails that the Forest Service manages. And they're not absolutely always, but they're almost always fully accessible trails. So class 5 trails tend to be wide, paved, flat, built to accommodate large group sizes. Think of a tour bus pulling in and it's the trail outside of the visitor center, that type of thing, or in urban areas. And then as you go down the spectrum, I think if you think of a typical Forest Service backcountry trail, you're probably thinking of a Class 3 or a Class 2. 60% or 58 or so percent of our miles, as we're getting our inventory cleaned up at the last annual year-end inventory, 58% of our miles, Forest Service miles, are Class 3. Less than 1% of the miles are Class 5. And then Class 2 are good, challenging backcountry trails. And I think those are right around 23-24% of our miles. And then Class 1 trails they're about to go off the spectrum. They're really hard, really challenging, require route finding, kind of orienteering, off the deep end, extremely difficult, challenging trails, and hardly developed at all. So that's kind of the spectrum.
Where do you find, or where is the represented, or its intended design and management standards? Where do you find those? I mean, you go on a trail and it was a 3 and now it's a 2 based upon your walking on it, but where do you go to find what the original intent?
Right, what the original, well, that's the dilemma. Now, if we happen to have a recent NEPA decision that says, hey, this trail is going to be managed like this, there's the answer. But most times there's this trail here, and it's always been here, and we've had different managers and different folks come through, and currently it's managed like this, and as far back as we can tell, it's been managed like that, and that's the dilemma. And so that's why our agency is really into TMOs now, which aren't decision documents, but it's a way to somehow get that management intent written down. And so you start with forest plan, which kind of get you there. If there's travel management plan that's been done, if there's site-specific NEPA, better. But if there's nothing, then you need to get with the district ranger and the trail managers. And if there's folks from around the community who've known that trail for years, the input is very valuable. And go, what's the management intent for this trail? Now, as we head forward, and that's the tricky part, is getting all these TMOs finally documented, but they're a really valuable tool. They're a valuable tool internally and externally. I think hopefully by the end of this you'll agree. The dilemma is getting them down. And then as we go forward and we want to change management intent or prescription, then you go, okay, depends on what's being proposed, whether, and the scope and scale, etc., and whether it needs to go through then a public process and go, okay, you want to change it, but what's being proposed, why, and then, what comes out the other end.
Gary, sometimes they have a trail inventory that has primary and secondary management objectives on there. Many forests don't, but we work with forests that did have. Their time of wilderness designation, 1988.
Yep, and some forests had trail management plans, but we just weren't consistent across the agency. A lot of the agency use these concepts of mainline, secondary, and way. And actually, I grew up in Region 1 of the Forest Service, and by God, that's what we're going to use. That's how I was raised. And I fell on my sword over it. But there's whole regions of the Forest Service who don't use it, and I got shot down right up early. So we just didn't have any consistency. So we're trying to get there.
Jamie, you did say that eventually this will be available to the public, these TMLs?
Yeah, they're available now. We're trying to figure out, you could walk into any district office, and if they have them, you could say, can I have a copy? And Joel Holtrup, our deputy chief, has said, absolutely. Now, the thing, and Dennis is going to lead this discussion after this, we'll look at and go, one, do the districts have them? They're trying to get them. To what extent? I think we've got them documented on about 23% of our trails right now, or 25%. But the other thing is, are they correct? Because this is a big learning curve. And so the thing with the TMOs is it's not a decision. And if somebody wrote down Trail Class 3 and they didn't know what they were doing and it should have been Trail Class 2, you get the eraser or the ink pen, cross it out, and it's Trail Class 2. This is not a formal decision document. But if the management intent, if it's always been to manage that trail as a Class 2, and now they want to beef it up, bring the grade down, widen it, and change it to a Trail Class 3, well, that's a different deal entirely. That's not erasing the thing.
So what we're really looking at then is, in this inventory process, if there isn't any history, any documented history, go back on. What's being put down during the inventory process, as time goes along, if that isn't challenged or changed, that would really become the rule of history.
Yeah, I think that's true, although all the way to the top, to the chief is saying, we've got to all be reasonable as we're doing this. And everybody's trying to do their best, but, you know, if one of these is wrong, we rip it up and do it again. But yeah, and that's where, if there isn't any written direction to go from, that's where it gets down to with the local decision officer going, well, let's get it on paper. What is the management intent? And there's a lot of that around the country. I mean, when you were rangering, Dennis, there's a lot of that. That, you know, your guy just knew it. The rec manager on the district said, well, this is how we always clear that thing 10 feet wide, 8 feet high. Well, where does it say to do that? That's just how we do it. So, yeah. Okay, so still sticking with the, was there another question?
I guess two questions here. On the new ongoing, some of the forests are working in new management plans, and or they'll be coming up. Is there any requirement that they have to do trail TMOs for the new plans?
Yeah, there's a national requirement. It's now in the directives that says there needs to be a TMO documented for every trail, but it doesn't say by when. So for forests who are in the middle of doing travel management planning, most of those, they're just going to wait till they get a decision and then they're going to document it on a TMO. For forests who aren't going to be doing travel management planning for a while, they need to get going on these. The only hard and fast requirement, though, right now, the only absolute requirement is if a unit has been assigned to do a condition assessment, which they're assigned on a random sample annually. Before you can do a condition assessment and go out and say, here's what needs to be done to this trail, you have to have a TMO. So that's the only requirement, which is insufficient. And so, but that's the only national requirement. But some regions are stepping way ahead of that and implementing additional requirements. And like Region 1 last year, they're running like 90-some% on TMOs. Region 10, which is Alaska, has got 100% of TMOs. The Southeast region is way up there. And so the regions are taking it on at different speeds.
Okay, I guess my second comment was, I recently had a meeting with our trails coordinator and so on, and he passed out a copy of the matrix, and we're supposedly going to do some work this summer on some projects, and the matrix goes back, and the one that he passed out was the old 2004-2005 matrix. It isn't updated at all. This is the directive he's got from his forest supervisor. This is the one to follow. And with that directive, I see some major problems.
I see some major problems too. And so this is why this right here is another big step. You guys can help us. I mean, we're doing our darndest. I mean, going all the way to the chief, down through forest supervisors, online training, written requirements, email requirements, monthly conference calls, and still there's pockets where, you know, it's a big dispersed organization. And so in a constructive and positive way, I mean, you guys can help. Hey, you know, I was just at a Forest Service training and I saw this, and this is a lot more than what you have, George, you know. I mean, we can all work together, and like when Dennis goes through this data stuff this afternoon, you'll see some stuff that when he asked for the information and we pulled it, and I went, yeah, I don't want to send this to you yet, Dennis, till we get this is embarrassing, some of it, but we're trying to bring it all along. So, and actually at a break, tell me what unit that is, and I'll try to get with them too.
We have the same issue.
Really? Okay.
And I think some of it is, it's not resistance, it's that the trails people are so overwhelmed by the budget.
Absolutely.
Staff shortages, forest health issues that are causing way more trees to come down than they used to. They're just struggling. They're not really worried about this. They just can't get the dang things passed.
Absolutely. And, you know, and that's kind of a prevailing reality. Yeah, it kind of gets down to, am I going to swing up Pulaski and keep the trail open, or am I going to go do some data thing? Well, you know what the choice is going to be, and I get it. But we're kind of have been in a death spiral because if we don't make the case to Congress that we need money and the only way we can do it is with credible inventory and credible cost data, it's hard coming out of that death spiral. So that's where you got the deputy chief and others saying, yeah, I know we need to swing the flask because the trail's falling off the hill, but somehow we got to get this done too to kind of stop the spiral.
Did I understand you correctly? You said there's no time frame that these have to be done?
Not yet, not 100%. And the history on that is probably in, I don't know, 2003, 2004, the Washington office was gung-ho to require that TMOs be populated, get them, but the huge, just based on what you just said with the field just being completely overwhelmed, there was a huge backlash from the field going, WO or Washington office, you tell us the minimum requirements, but no more. We won't support it. And that was coming through regional foresters. And so Washington backed off and said, okay, we're just going to lay out the minimum requirements. And minimum requirements are that there are TMOs, the TMOs use these trail classes, et cetera, but so far there's not a requirement, except for on these annual condition surveys, which we're only doing annual condition surveys on 1% of our trails a year. But the more we train with this, anyone who comes out of one of these sessions, or almost anyone, by and large, the consensus is, oh, we need TMOs now. And so most regions on their own are stepping up and going after this. And a lot of them are going after it like on a 10% or 20%, trying to bite off that much a year to get them populated.
We've asked this strategy, they have no idea what TMO is.
Mm-hmm. That's what we're dealing with. But I think, I want to move us on because I'm kind of watching the time, but I do want to say with these online training sessions that we've been having for the last 2 months, we've got unprecedented participation, way more than we have ever had in years past. So somehow the buzz is getting out there. You guys are helping, I think, too, with the buzz, but we're getting a lot better participation in these this same session, the trail fundamentals session.
Do these TMO inventories have to be performed by Forest Service personnel, or can they be contracted out to, say, a local chapter?
Well, I guess there's probably not a right answer, but I will say, and let's think about that question when we get to the end, that this piece of paper is a pretty important piece of paper because somehow, after all the discussing and agreeing and disagreeing gets done, it will be documenting the vision for the trail. And so we're obviously not just going to hand that off and go, hey, to a high school student or something, why don't you write some stuff in here? But there's probably different ways to get that done. And but in the end, it's going to be a Forest Service district ranger who's going to sign this thing and say, yep, this is it. And I'm thinking, some retired Forest Service folks who really know the history and know, oh my gosh, if there's, a high trust factor.
One of the issues before we leave the subject, I think it's important to realize that a lot of the priorities at the ground level, at the field level, are not trails. And that has got, that needs to come from the chief's office. Mm-hmm. Because it's so easy for that lack of interest, lack of budget, lack of staff, lack of experienced people just to as Mary says, this is overwhelming problem. And then if that isn't determined to be a high priority for the top, there's no support.
Completely. I completely agree. And, there's been all these initiatives and all this buzz lately with the current administration about children and connecting communities, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I already told you I'm a trail person through and through, and I know most of you are. Trails are just in our hearts. But you know what? Trails are where it's at. Trails connect people to nature. Trails connect community. Trails are what connect people in a way so that they see the big picture and want to actually protect our resources for the long term and our kids' kids. So, on so many levels, I think that we need to, as an agency, step up and put the resources into trails. But
well, unfortunately, we've gone through this process. We've gone through the process of getting to the wood. We've gone through the process of recognizing the agencies in transition. But there's never been, at least in my experience, the real priority or need or importance of trails at the field or region.
Yep, and to make it, to just amplify what you're saying, as far as we can tell, the Forest Service is the largest trail management organization in the world. In terms of an organized entity managing trails. We by far have the largest trail network in the United States. But then you add on what Alan's saying, and it's like, and how many resources are we, and how many professionals are we putting to it? So I couldn't agree with you more.
Well,
to maybe counter what they've been saying up in Wyoming, one of the trail crew bosses on the San Juan National Forest handed me this book last week and said, "This is what's coming down the pipe for us."
Oh, good. So there is hope. We're getting through.
So it is getting down. This is on the San Juan, and one of my buddies over at the Forest Service handed me this and said, "Hey, you guys might be interested in this."
The San Juan's where we've had some of the rangers take the training.
All the Region 2 money goes to Colorado and Wyoming.
All right, I'm going to get us through trail classes quick. So you can see the spectrum, and then looking down the left side, there's some kind of descriptors of attributes. And I'm not going to drag you through all this, but just so you get the gist. That first category, where's my mouse? Right. This first category here, tread and traffic flow, for each trail class just talks about, the trail surface, the tread itself. So for the class 1 goat trails, the tread is intermittent and often indistinct. So you might be out there and go, "Oh, I'm standing on the trail and I don't actually see anything." Might require route finding, predominantly native materials. And then as you jump up to class 3, you can see that the tread is continuous and obvious, native or imported materials. So the surface might be out of just the native dirt that's there, or some crushed rock might be brought in. Or you might have a wood-decked puncheon in there. And then as you go up to class 4 and 5, if you look at class 5, that first bullet says the tread is wide, firm, stable, and generally uniform. Well, firm, stable, and uniform are officially defined terms that are defined in our accessibility documentation, so those have legal connotations. So if we say that it's firm, stable, and uniform, we mean that thing is fully accessible. And you've got in the very back of your book in the references, you've got a reference for FS tag, Forest Service Trail Accessibility Guidelines, which dovetail right into this, which are the process that our agency uses to go out and do an assessment to determine, 1, if a trail should be accessible, and then 2, what it would take to bring it up to accessibility standards.
You might explain what you mean by accessible.
Oh, sure. So by accessible, I guess probably 8 or so years ago they were called barrier-free trails, and now they're called accessible trails by all the feds. But basically it's a trail that can accommodate someone with a mobility impairment or a sight impairment. And so wheelchair basically is what we're talking about. And they tend to, you can have a fully accessible trail starting from the high class 3 trails up through 4s and 5s. But it depends. It depends on, not having too many or any protrusions sticking out of the tread that would stop a wheelchair, not having the tread ever get narrower than 32 inches anywhere because that would stop a chair. Or, the outslope of the tread itself, if it's beyond, if it's greater than, 3%, that becomes a potential tipping point for a chair. So they generally are very flat or minimally graded, wide, surfaced trails. Those are the accessible trails. Thanks. So that's kind of tread and traffic flow. And then if you look here under obstacles, and we're going to dig into obstacles a little bit more later, but right here at this level, this is probably important to catch. This is obstacles in the general sense. And so under class 1, obstacles are common, they're naturally occurring, they're often substantial and intended to provide increased challenge. There can be narrow passages, brush, steep grades, rocks, and logs. Those are things that would be considered obstacles. So those are actually part of the experience. So if you think of a hiker or an extreme mountain biker going, "Oh yeah, I want boulders this big that I have to climb over, and I want brush thunking me in the face," that's all part of the good fun, or that's part of the experience. Those would be considered obstacles there. Then and remember, this trail class matrix right now is very general, and we're talking about all trails, regardless of who they're managed for. Now, once we get down to going, this trail is managed for motorcycles, or this one is designed and managed for equestrians or pack and saddle, we get a lot more specific on this. But in general, these are the concepts. And so if you go to class 3 for obstacles may still be common, but they're not substantial, and they're not intended to provide challenge. So they're not there intentionally. If there's going to be an obstacle like a rock sticking out of the tread, it tends to be because it's there or the tread's worn down and it's just not worth the expense to get rid of it, and we can live with it. The mode of travel can still get through there. And then when you go up to Class 5 trails, which are those fully accessible trails, there are no obstacles. Obstacles are not present, and the grades are typically less than 8%. And if you notice on the trail classes below here, we didn't say anything about percent grade. That's because up at Class 5 on these accessible trails, that's where the grade itself can become a barrier. So, and we have to keep it less than 8%. We can have short exceptions that run up to 12%. Let me just show you the second page real quick. I think this is all pretty intuitive, and our folks are getting it down slowly but surely. So under constructed features, and those are, things along the trails, signs, bridges, puncheons, surfacing, etc., switchbacks. Class 1 structures are minimal to non-existent. Those are kind of like naturally occurring, very light on the land trails. Drainage is typically accompanied without structures. Natural fords, typically no bridges, and so those are where you get your feet wet. If you want to go across the stream, figure out how to get across the stream. As you go up the spectrum towards Trail Class 3, structures may be common and may be substantial, natural or constructed fords, bridges as needed, and then we're talking native or imported materials. And then finally, if you go up to Class 5 trails, think of that highly developed trail outside of a visitor center, that can be, the whole thing can be a constructed feature. The whole thing might be elevated boardwalk with a viewing platform, amenities like benches along the sides, and lots of interpretive signs, that type of thing. Under signs, I think that as you take the time to read through there, you'll see that it follows the same flow. Minimal signing on the less developed trails, all the way up to full signing with interpretive kiosks and informational boards, and et cetera, up through Class 3 and 4. And then finally, this last one, kind of some rule of thumb guidance about the setting, the typical rec environs and experience, and generally the idea being that those less developed trails tend to occur and are more fitting in the less developed, the more pristine settings. And then as you go up the scale towards the urban interface, you're going to see the more highly developed trails. That's in general. We added a footnote, though, because there had been a lot of questions about this, and we added a footnote that clarifies that there can be exceptions, and there are exceptions for all of those, all across the board there. So that's kind of an overview of the matrix, and I want to show you some photo examples before we take a break here. So if you can turn to page 29. When we developed these with the other federal agencies, this was a huge step in terms of getting some consistent understanding of what we mean by these trail classes. And so if you thumb through, beginning on page 29, those photos, you can see where we basically took the descriptors out of the trail class matrix and we just illustrated them with photos. And so you can see looking through there, I'm looking at Trail Class 1 on page 29, TC1, the tread's intermittent and indistinct. So there's an illustration of that. And as you thumb through the photos, that's been a huge help in terms of calibrating us within the Forest Service, but also the other 4 agencies. Now, this has never failed, so hopefully, we'll see. Has anybody here been to Multnomah Falls Trail? There's always, thank God, there's always somebody. Every class I've taught. That's really good. Well, that's good.
You go to breakfast there.
Okay, so exactly. So now that you're Multnomah Falls is on the Columbia Gorge on I-90, and it's heavily visited trail right there on the highway. And you look up these huge cascading falls, and there's this trail that goes up to this cantilevered overlook. It's very cool. Lots of people. So now that you're a trail class expert, what trail class do you think Multnomah Falls Trail is?
When I was in elementary school, it would have been a goat track. It is now flat top all the way to the top of the platform. Mm-hmm. And it has hazards at the lower bridge for if you wear a barrier for wheelchair to go above the bridge overlook. Mm-hmm. So that would be 4.
Oh, you get an award. That's very cool. That's great. That's it. And I always use Multnomah. It's because inevitably somebody's been there, and what prevents it from being a 5? Because you mentioned it could be almost accessible. It's the grade. The grade knocks it out. But otherwise, it's wide, it's paved, there are no obstacles. But the grade knocks it out. And so that's a perfect class forward. it's a great example for like sharing with the Park Service, and the Park Service is sharing it with the BLM, and we all kind of going, okay, if that's a 4, then a 3 must be like. And what we're encouraging our forests to do within the Forest Service is when they have training sessions and annual meetings is to get together and go, okay, think of the Russian River Trail, or think of whatever trail it is that's on your forest, and the group goes, okay, that's definitely a class 2. If that trail was to standard, that's what we would call it too. And so we're trying to have those conversations to get everybody kind of calibrated. So these trail class photos have been a big help. So any questions on trail class so far? Okay. Well, yeah. So, I wrote down a note that I was going to mention, and I don't remember what it was. Oh, I know what it was. Bob, is that your name, Bob?
Yeah.
Bob was asking me if this book could, if the contents of this could be available to be posted on a website indefinitely, and so I'm going to get Bob the electronic copy. All of this material used to be posted on one of the Forest Service's external websites, but Homeland Security and everything got brought inside a firewall. This is serious stuff, apparently. So, we've got a contract right now, and within the next several months, we're going to stand up an external page, and it's going to be kind of a trail manager's toolkit. And like the Park Service, BLM, and the states, they all want us to stand it up because they all are finding this stuff very useful. And so once we get that up, you guys will get the web links for it, and you'll be able to go and just pull this stuff down, including hopefully the on-demand training materials, as well as when we go over the Forest Service data here at the end of today, we're hoping to have on that website where this data is just refreshed and posted periodically. And so you guys go, how many miles are managed for pack and saddle trail class 3 on such and such forest? It'll just be there, and our partners don't have to request the information. We just put it up quarterly or however often we can. That's what we're trying to do. Joel Holtrup's all about that too. And then the last thing for break that I wanted to mention, these guys we're talking about mules, and I don't know mules that well, but I like them. And I just made the comment, the wisecrack, that if I would have been on a mule, I probably wouldn't have been in that stupid almost horse wreck.
That's correct.
Dennis agreed. Yes.
That's correct.
The other thing, though, here's the other thing that should have tipped me off that I was going to tell you. My boss, Jonathan Stevens, who was way back there, and I'm an advanced beginner rider, maybe a little more better than that, but Jonathan's really a beginner. He had a lovely ride, no issues whatsoever. Well, here's what should have tipped me off, okay? His horse was named Buttercup. My horse was named Vinny. I'll never get on another Vinny horse again. Oh, he's so stubborn, man. He's really awesome. All right, we're going to keep rolling through fundamentals. So you got your TMO sheet. So still on the front page there. This section right here is not actually a fundamental, but it's really important to have it documented on the TMOs. And basically it's where we document the ROS, either the Recreation Opportunity Spectrum or the Wilderness Recreation Opportunity Spectrum. And in the book, in the step-by-step instructions, there's guidance on this. But basically, ROS is just a kind of an inventory that the Forest Service, and I believe the BLM use as kind of an inventory of the setting. So how developed or primitive would you expect, or pristine would you expect the environment, the setting to be? And a lot of that comes out of forest plans. There are ROS inventories in forest plans, and so you just say, well, this trail is running through a roaded natural, which is a somewhat fairly modified setting, or it's going through semi-primitive, non-motorized. And so you'd identify that. Note that on the TMO it says you pick one or the other. If it's in wilderness, then the segment is in wilderness, or if it's outside of wilderness, you're using ROS. And then, since trails are long and linear, they go in wilderness, outside of wilderness. They might go through different ROS settings, and so you would just segment your TMO. And so if you look right here where it says TMO section, you can see how you could maybe go from milepost 0 to milepost 17.4, here's the TMO, but then at 17.4 when I go into wilderness, the prescription changes and you just do another segment and attach it to this. And in your book, there's a couple, 2 or 3 examples of TMO forms, and one of them, at least one of them's got a segment like that. So it shows you when it goes into wilderness, the prescription changes. Maybe we want to manage the trail as more narrow, more rugged, the clearing limits come in, etc. So that's rocks. Continuing down the front sheet of the TMO, we come to this next fundamental, which is designed use. Now, it's not really the next fundamental, it's the one that fits on this piece of paper next. And that's just a constraint of using a piece of paper. We've just in the last year gone to electronic TMOs, which are really helpful for, at least for the Forest Service, because in the flow of things, the next fundamental that we will consider is managed use. We're going to do that right now, which is actually on the back of your sheet with the travel management information. Excuse me. But because we were stuck with this, 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, this is where it fit. So that's where, hang on to the idea of designed use for just a second. Flip to the back side of your TMO form, and you'll see we've got travel management strategies. And let's talk about managed use, which is right up there with trail class. It's as important. It's a very important, it's a really important fundamental, and it's one that it just sounds so obvious, and the words are so common that I think it's misinterpreted all the time. And you'll see this, I think, in some of the data that we're going to look at in a little bit. So managed use is really important to understand clearly. So the definition of managed use is managed use. It's an official term. As our lawyers have told me, this is a term of art, so it's capitalized. It's a formal term defined in our manual. But managed use are the mode or the modes of travel that are actively managed and appropriate on a trail based on its design and management. So the way that we teach this is don't ever say the word managed use without saying actively. It's not like, oh yeah, the uses that are managed out there. It's the actively managed uses. There's management intent behind that concept. Let's look at this a little closer. Okay, business rule, there can be more than one managed use per trail or trail segment. So you can have, 1, 2, or 3, or 4 managed uses on the same stretch of trail. But here's the important thing. Managed use indicates a management intent to accommodate a specific trail use. So that's the heavy thing. There's management intent there. So the actively managed uses are almost always, or I guess always, a subset of all of the allowed uses. So probably 8-10 years ago, we used to just talk in terms of allowed uses. What's allowed out here? Well, this, that, and the other thing. But then, with technology, oh yeah, that can be out there too. And the list kind of is never ending. And the concept of allowed uses isn't really helpful in terms of managing trails because it can kind of be a laundry list. If you've got a non-motorized trail where all motorized uses are prohibited, and you go, oh yeah, for sure, horses, hikers, bikes, and then somebody calls and says, can I take my skateboard? And you go, well, I don't think you'd enjoy it, but you sure could. Can I take my roller skates? Can I take my llamas? The list just goes on and on. So we kind of have stepped back from that loose, never-ending concept of allowed use and have said, out of everything that can be allowed out there that's allowed, what's the handful of the actively managed uses that we're actually targeting, that we're designing and building and maintaining that trail to, in particular, accommodate those uses. And so with that comes a user expectation that if pack and saddle or mountain bikes are a managed use, then the expectation would be that if the trail is up to standard, that you can go out there and that trail is designed to accommodate that use. So it's a fairly loaded term in many ways. Okay, so I think I'm going to hang on here. I get caught up with myself. Yeah, so with that, for example, a really common situation that occurs on National Forest System trails would be a non-motorized trail where motorized uses are prohibited and everything under the sun that doesn't have a motor is allowed, but what you'll commonly see almost all National Forest System trails are definitely managed for hiker pedestrian. I mean, that's the most common mode of transportation is your feet. So almost all of them, there might be some exceptions, but almost all of them have a managed use of hiker pedestrian. But a common combination that we'll see are hiker pedestrian paired with pack and saddle, and sometimes paired with mountain bike, depending on relative use levels and concentration, and if the topography can take it. But that's a pretty common combination is, yes, everything non-motorized is allowed, but what are the actively managed uses? It might be like those three uses is a pretty common thing to see. Now, sometimes where you've got higher levels of pack and saddle or higher levels of mountain bike, and depending on the sight distances and the topography and kind of the use culture, sometimes that's not such a wise idea, and officers will go, yeah, we're actually going to discourage one of those uses and encourage the other one just to avoid conflicts, but other times that works out quite well. These are just tools for managers to apply in a way that makes sense for the local situation.
Is there any circumstance where one use, managed use, would inherently exclude different managed use?
Is there any time where a situation where one managed use would inherently preclude another one? You know, I don't know. I'm sure that in certain situations, on site-specific situations, absolutely. Like if you're managing for non-motorized, then of course all the motorized ones are off the table. But you know, there's probably no one answer to that. Although I'm sure in certain circumstances there would be.
Well, if we're managing it for snowmobile trails, or for cross-country trails, it might include snowmobiles.
Yeah, so if you're managing for cross-country skiing, you might prohibit snow machines. You might, and that happens all over the place, and that makes sense. But we've got just as many places where the way the topography and the relative use levels are, it makes perfect sense to have managed for both of them. So it's really a local management call. Yeah. So there's probably dozens and dozens of could-be managed uses. The ones that the Forest Service has officially defined so far are here on the page. There's hiker pedestrian, pack and saddle, bicycle/mountain bike, motorcycle, ATVs, and then four-wheel drives greater than 50 inches in width. Over here on the right, the top three are the snow uses: cross-country ski, snowshoe, and snowmobile. And then there's motorized and non-motorized watercraft. Now, as we've got in the directives, this is not the definitive list. These are the ones that we commonly see and manage for on National Forest System trails. If a local unit goes, I really, really have a good reason, and I'm going to define a skateboard setup, define that and define the construction specs for that. The national directives say go for it, go through some sort of a local process to make sure that all works out. But if a use becomes prevalent enough, it'll bubble up through for national consideration and then possibly get added. Managed use is one of the interagency data standards, so all the federal agencies are using this, and they're behind the, okay, so we were talking about how the Forest Service is trying to get it together. Well, the other agencies are there too, but they're further behind than us, so they're coming along. And then also things like cross-country skiing up in Alaska. Actually the state of Alaska State Parks and State Department of Natural Resources have embraced TMOs and the fundamentals, which is very cool. But under cross-country skiing, for example, they're breaking that out into three categories. They're classic cross-country skiing, skate skiing, which is completely different. You need a wider track because your skis are doing this thing. And then ski touring, which is where dogs pull you on skis. So the state is defining a set of parameters. And I told them, excellent. And if it turns out that there's a high enough need for it in the Forest Service, we might look at adopting or adapting something along those lines. So this isn't a closed list, but again, we're trying to rein it in and have our folks talk apples to apples. So those are the lists of managed uses. Okay, so with that, we've got trail type. Remember, what are the trail types? Ground, water, and snow ice. Standard, terra, snow, and water. And we've got 5 trail classes, ranging 1 is the least developed to 5, which is the most highly developed. 3 is probably the most common for Forest Service trails. And then we've got this concept of managed use, which are, please always think the actively managed uses. That subset of the ones where there's management intent. The trail's been designed and is being maintained to accommodate those uses. We've got that little arrow right there, the pale arrow between trail class and managed use. And I would just blow it off, except that sometimes the question comes up and folks get concerned about, well, do you determine one before the other? And I really think they almost happen simultaneously. If you were thinking of a blank slate and you go, I'm going to put a trail up there. I mean, and you can't even start to think that without thinking the development scale. I'm thinking of a really tough trail, and you're probably already automatically at least thinking motorized or non. So it's kind of, to me, it's kind of like a pointless question. But just to help answer it, the determination of trail class and managed use happen kind of in conjunction, one with the other. Okay, any questions on managed use? Okay, so that example that I gave, where on this non-motorized trail, where everything non-motorized is allowed, but we've got 2 or 3, maybe 4 managed uses that we've specifically identified. From the managed use, you can identify the single design driver or the single designed use. So turn back to the front of your TMO form, and we're in the lower left. And so with managed use, I guess, boy, I would be surprised to ever see more than, 1 or 2 or 3 managed uses identified for a trail. If I saw like 6 or 7 managed uses, I would be tempted to go back to the manager and go, are you sure you're actively designing and maintaining this thing to accommodate all these uses? I mean, it's possible, but we tend to see a pretty narrow subset because they determine the design and construction specs for the trail. So in the example that I gave, that non-motorized trail where everything's allowed, in this example, the managed uses were hiker pedestrian, pack and saddle, and mountain bike. And we've got a single designed use. So what's designed use? Well, designed use, and this is important, designed use is the single managed use. It's the single managed use that requires the most demanding design, construction, and maintenance parameters or specifications. So out of those 3, hiker pedestrian, pack and saddle, and mountain bike, it's the one that has the most demanding construction and maintenance specs. And that in conjunction, when you combine it with the applicable trail class, that'll get you pointed right towards the construction or the design parameters for the trail. And so on the example I just gave, non-motorized trail, managed uses of hiker pedestrian, pack and saddle, mountain bike, which one is the design driver? Which one has the most limiting or demanding construction requirements in terms of how wide the trail is, how steep we can tolerate, what the turning radiuses need to be? Oh yeah, that doesn't surprise me from you guys. And that actually probably is pretty close to being the right answer. The answer, I think, is it depends. Usually at least one person will say, they tend to say pack and saddle, but somebody will say mountain bikes. And the answer probably is it depends, because it depends on the relative use levels on that particular trail. I mean, you might have, 3 or 4 horses out there a year, and you've got a ton of mountain bikes. And you might go, those mountain bikes are pounding this trail to heck. But we are managing for them, so we're going to have to beef up and reinforce the trail for that use. But we for sure want to make whatever allowances we need to so that we're definitely accommodating pack and saddle. So it depends. It also depends on, in addition to relative use levels, it depends on things like soil type, how erosive are the soils, and what do you have for grades, etc. We actually added into the directives with this past revision that exact example, and the exact example breaks towards pack and saddle. It says probably you'd tend to go pack and saddle, although you might look over at the mountain bike design specifications and go, we're going to have to pick up some adjustments. We're going to have to adjust the turning radiuses or the grades or whatever it is. So these really are general rules of thumb that can be kind of modified to write a prescription that fits the local situation. So designed use is the single managed use that requires the most demanding design, construction, and maintenance specs. Although the trail, like we just went through, although the trail might be actively managed for more than one use, and lots of uses may be allowed, there's only one designed use per trail or per trail segment. And so I think sometimes folks get a little concerned. It's really important that we correctly identify the design use, but people get a little concerned when they go, like say in the example we just did, if we decided that, you know what, in that example, mountain bikes really are the design driver. We don't have a lot of pack and saddle. The bikes are pounding, trenching out the trail. Mountain bikes are the design driver. But pack and saddle, mountain bikes, and hiker-pedestrian are all the managed uses. So those are all legitimate. The trail needs to be designed and managed to accommodate them. Those are targeted or sometimes even encouraged uses. And so people, when they see the single design use, sometimes get confused and think that that means that that's the preferred or the predominant use. That's not what it means at all. It just means out of the uses, the 3 uses that we're going after, that's the one that has the most demanding design requirements in this case, and basically you kind of forget that it's pack and saddle or bikes, but it gets us to the numbers, like how wide, how steep, etc. It's just a vehicle to get us to the construction and maintenance specs. I think, to me, the important one of those, they're both very important, but managed use is the important one in particular. So the identified design uses match the list of managed uses, same, and those same caveats apply. This list is flexible, can shift at the local level, and it might, I would imagine it'll probably change over time with the agency. I don't know if we'll add, hovercrafts or whatever. I just saw some bizarre motorized ski thing that's been going around on the internet lately. It's kind of horrifying, some of it to me, but who knows what.
Motorized segways.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cross-country segways.
Yeah. All right, so design use determines the technical specifications for trail design, construction, and maintenance. And then for each design use, the single design driver, and if you can, excuse me guys, okay class, I know you're getting tired. For each single design use, when you pair that up with the applicable trail class, there's a corresponding set of nationally standardized design specifications. And that's going to be our next fundamental. So we've got our 3 trail types. We've got trail class, and we've got the actively managed uses. And from the managed uses, you pick the one design driver, which is the design use. And then we head to the next, and I think the final fundamental, which are design parameters. And I'm on the front of the TMO sheet. And design parameters basically are the technical specifications. That's it. They're the technical specifications. They used to be in the, for folks who were familiar with the old Forest Service handbook, they were in the trail guides. They were listed in the trail guides. And so, but they're now called design parameters because we changed things, I guess. But they're technical guidelines for the survey, design, construction, maintenance, and then subsequent assessment, condition assessment of a trail, based on its design use and its trail class. So if you know the design use and the trail class, you can go to the design parameters and it'll kind of get us headed into the right spot of like, okay, this would be the general expectation on this trail. And from this national broad brush set of design parameters, you identify a specific, trail-specific set of parameters. Standardized set of the construction and maintenance specs. This is very important. Nationally standardized based on probably roughly 80% commonality that we've got agency-wide across 150,000 miles of trail. But of course, local deviations can be established based on trail-specific conditions, topography, and other factors, as long as if you don't start identifying so many deviations that it starts to not look like the original trail class in the first place. So one, we need to play it straight and stay within the trail class. So an example might be, actually a very common example might be on a trail where maybe the national, for the particular, well, let's say a pack and saddle trail, and I don't know which trail class it would be, but a pack and saddle trail where the national, pack and saddle is the design use, the design driver, and maybe the national parameters say, hey, the trail width should be 18 inches. So you go, okay, well that's cool, actually that works well for this trail, that's what I'm going to describe it. I want an 18-inch tread. Except for when you go up across this cliff, based on past history, and actually I'm thinking of the St. Joe where I was in the horse racks, and this actually happened. The ranger said, okay, that thing is now going to become 4 feet wide. I don't care. It needs to be wider than that. It's not safe. And so that would be a deviation, and that could be written down as an exception, that from here to here, regardless of what the national stuff says, it needs to be wider for these reasons. And what we tell our folks is those are fine, and you can put those on your TMO. And I think you've got an example of those on your example TMOs. But if you do that, if you do a deviation, footnote it, and put an explanation under the remarks section as to why. And it's not so much for national or Washington office oversight. It's more so when you leave the ranger district and the next guy comes in and says, okay, you didn't know what you were doing. I'm putting this back to 18 inches. There'll be a track record as to, well, no, this is why we're managing that thing at 4 feet wide across there. So that's the idea with the design parameters, standardized construction and maintenance specs, and deviations where they make sense can certainly be incorporated. Similarly, like I just talked about, if you've got that trail that you're actively managing it for mountain bikes and pack and saddle, if you decided that pack and saddle is the design driver, you might go, yes, I'm following the national parameters just fine, but I need to vary here to accommodate some aspect of bikes, and so you might tweak a certain number and just document why you did it. So here's the design parameters. There's design tread width, surface, grade, cross slope, clearing, and turns or switchbacks. And notice that we put the word design in front of all of those. And that's because similarly, when you get way down in the dirt here, you're kind of going, okay, am I writing down how steep this thing actually is or how steep it should be? So it's just another reminder, this is the management intent. What's intended on the trail, which may or may not match what you've got on the ground. And it's the general intent, too, I should say. So like with design grade, maybe you say, we want the prevailing grade to be, 15%. And that's in general. And there's going to be places where, in general, you can meet that on the trail, but there's going to be places where there's going to be exceptions. And that's okay. But in general, this is the general vision for the trail. So if you take a look at page 43, let's look at the design parameters, just do another quick kind of overview on those. So the verbiage up at the top of the design parameters, which start on page 43, I'm on the first one, which is the hiker pedestrian parameters. That verbiage up at the top kind of puts out there again those basic business rules as just a reminder to our folks so that they're clear, that it's the management intent, there can be exceptions. And you can see how these design parameters are totally based on the trail class and how important it is for us to get the correct identification of the applicable trail classes. Those run across the top. And you can see in the header up at the upper left it says hiker pedestrian. And I think each of these parameters are each a couple pages. And so I think it goes hiker pedestrian, then pack and saddle, mountain bike. We've got all the non-motorized standard Terra Trail ones up front. And then we go into motorized and then snow at the end. So the way these are set up, if you look along the left, find my pointer. That first set of rows deals with the tread width. And you can see that for hiker pedestrian, I think it's for hiker pedestrian and pack and saddle, those both have a breakout for wilderness and non-wilderness single lane. And so this is just providing general rule of thumb guidance to our folks. And so if you look across, I think it makes sense. Class 1, wilderness single lane, I'm on hiker pedestrian. National says you can have a width of 0 to 12 inches. So you could say this is the most extreme rugged trail that we manage. There's no tread built. The tread width is 0. And that could be legitimate on some trails. Or 12 inches. And then you can see how you go across. I'm still here on this page 43. If you go across to class 3 wilderness single lane, it shows a range of 12 to 24 inches, and exceptions may be up 36 to 48 at steep side slopes, and then on up. And then you can see up in class 5, why in class 5 for wilderness does it say not applicable? Yeah, you just generally wouldn't tend to see a trail that's paved and that highly developed in the middle of wilderness. There can be exceptions. There probably is an exception somewhere. But in general, it's just not applicable. And so when you look across here and you see these ranges of values, what it says in your step-by-step instructions for the TMO where you're writing your prescription for your trail is pick a number. So you pick a number within the range. You wouldn't tell a volunteer crew or a contractor, yeah, go build me a trail anywhere from 48 to 72 inches. You'd say, I want it to be 42 inches wide, or whatever the number is. So you pick, whenever there's a range, you pick a specific number and you document that on the front page of your TMO sheet under design parameters. And so you can see how design tread width provide guidance on single lane trails within and outside of wilderness, double lane trails, which we don't have a lot of those, but we have some. And then this this row that says structures minimum width, that's a new addition that we added in this last revision. And basically, that's saying that on a structure, which would be like a bridge or a boardwalk or a turnpike, that the minimum width that we'd expect to see would be whatever the number is. There can be exceptions. You can prescribe something different, but that's pretty helpful because we'll get questions like somebody will say, well, if my trail has to be 36 inches wide, is there a rule about how wide the bridge has to be? That kind of thing. And so this minimum width is based on kind of a safety consideration. So whatever the mode of travel, this is foot travel, what would be the minimum that would be adequate to accommodate that mode of travel? And so you can see on the pack and saddle, which is a couple pages later, under structures, we're running a wider width, aren't we? Somebody see the number?
For which?
Pack and saddle, it's a couple pages later on structures, minimum width.
Structures?
Yeah.
Other than bridges?
36.
36?
Bridges without handrails?
Oh yeah, and that's right. We got even more specific on that when we broke it out, whether we're on bridges or not. So I think that's pretty helpful guidance. And then of course, if we're grandfathering in a trail that already has structures, I think that when the local managers go to document this prescription, they need to think about it. They need to go, well, are we saying that we want to invest to replace all this stuff? Or are we saying, no, some of this is okay, but as we replace it, they just need to think about the implications. So continuing down through these rows, there's guidance on the design surface, the type. Is it native? Is it imported materials? Is it graded? And then this breakout here for protrusions and obstacles is new. That used to be, prior to last fall or so, it used to be, to me, kind of a muddled hodgepodge of both talking about obstacles and protrusions. And so I think this provides a lot cleaner guidance. Protrusions are now defined in the Forest Service Manual and Handbook, and basically they're things that stick out of the tread, roots and rocks and holes that stick out of the tread. Obstacles are things that can come out of the tread or in from the sides that would impede travel by your managed uses. And so with protrusions, we break it out. I'm still on hiker pedestrian, so you can see a protrusion, something sticking out of the tread on Trail Class 1. We could accept rocks and logs and things of up to 2 feet, and they could likely be common and continuous, because on those low-end trails, if the design driver, if the design use is hiker pedestrian, that's part of the desired challenge. And then as you go up the spectrum on protrusions, you can see that you get to Class 3, where we don't want any protrusions that are greater than 3 inches. Generally, those are rocks or roots. They may be common, but they're not continuous. That's the expectation. And then you go up. Now, if you look at obstacles, though, that's when does a protrusion or a rock or a root or a hole become literally an obstacle to the intended mode of travel. And so under obstacles, you can see we've now defined those as the maximum height that we would expect. So Class 1, 2 foot. That would be acceptable when you're climbing and scrambling over these 2 foot things. And then you go on up to where at Trail Class 4, 8 inches, and then Trail Class 5, there's just flat out no obstacles. With that, if you let's switch to pack and saddle and look at this for just a second. It's 2 pages later. Must be on, I would think that's page 45. So you can look at how they're defined by the design driver or by the designed use. So on pack and saddle, for example, down here under protrusions, you can see it's much more conservative, because for pack and saddle, okay, for hikers on the challenging trails, Obstacles and protrusions are part of the experience. They're desired, actually, to varying degrees. And that tends to be the same for mountain bikes, especially as folks are going more towards the challenge courses down the spectrum, and also for motorcycles, we've found. But as you go up the spectrum with hikers, less tolerance, and they don't want those things as part of the experience. And the same was for those other modes of travel I just mentioned. But with pack and saddle in particular, because there's just that other factor. It's a person who can manage themselves, but there's also another being involved, another unknown, and then a triple unknown if their name's Vinny, I guess. But yeah, so it's a lot more conservative, I think, and generally it's a more of a conservative slant on how desirable obstacles and protrusions are. Certainly, we don't want all pack and saddle trails to be a piece of cake. We don't. We want a spectrum, but probably not as much going completely off the deep end into the fully challenging, although there can be exceptions to that. So you can see if you look at the protrusions, we're not talking 2-foot steps. We're talking generally protrusions for class 2, less than 6 inches, but they might be common and continuous. That could be a pretty challenging trail if it went on and on. And then trail class 3, across all the trail classes, or all the design parameters, trail class 3 is the anchor. It tends to be they all hinge at about the same across trail class 3. And then you go up to trail class 4. So continuing down through these rows, just jump down to the second page of any set of parameters. You see we've got guidance on the design grade, and I just want to take a second to explain this. It looks kind of confusing, but it's really pretty straightforward. So design grade, that first row is the target grade. These are all defined in the manual and handbook, which you can pull up online. But the target grade is basically the prevailing grade. So over most of the trail, we would expect most of the trail to fall within, what grade, and so you can look across. But on any given trail, there's always exceptions. There's always little steep pitches to get up on the bench or whatever, and that would be the short pitch maximum. And we have those, but they generally shouldn't be more than 200 feet in length. And you can accumulate those little short steep sections as long as you don't have so many of them that the trail finally is getting steeper than what was intended by the trail class. And so this maximum pitch density says how much of the trail can have those steep sections on it. And so you can kind of see how that works. So on this pack and saddle one, on a class 2, up to 20% of the trail could actually fall into that steeper category of 30%. And 30% is a steep grade. It's a tough one to sustain, especially for pack and saddle. We would only be prescribing that in certain circumstances where the soil type, we could lay in a sustainable trail and keep it there. And then you can see how the tolerances drop as you go up the spectrum. So the next set of rows deals with the design cross slope. And design cross slope is the outslope of the tread itself, like whether it's crowned, insloped, or outsloped. It's not the side slope or the fall line of the mountain. Clearing width and height, I think, are pretty obvious. Pick a number. If there's a range, pick one number. And then if you look under design clearing, shoulder clearance, that's a new one that just got added in this last go-around. And basically, shoulder clearance is defined as right along the trail tread, right along the edges, that area that's right adjacent on the ground where roots or rocks could be coming in, and they could either be pedal bumpers for mountain bikes, or peg bumpers for motorcycles, or pack bumpers for stock. We've tried to add some guidance on a clearance. And what we did for pack and saddle is we just brought forward, it's always been there, we have never let go of it, but we put it right in the matrix, the general pack clearance of a 36 by 36 clearance, so packs can get through without, banging on trees and rocks. And then turning radius, and so that's the, from the midpoint of a switchback, what would the radius be? So those are the design parameters in general. There's the footnotes are pretty similar on all of them. I think the hiker pedestrian one's got an additional one that speaks to accessible trails that are designed for wheelchair mobility impaired. Then the other thing is, I don't have it with me, but in the revised handbook in chapter 10, there's this chart that just lays out all of the managed uses, and it compares them, and the chart's called potential appropriatenesses of managed uses by trail class. And that was a lawyer who came up with that title, not me. But the idea is, as you look across all the trail classes, okay, hiking and foot travel is the most common mode of transportation we have. And so it makes sense to me that the Forest Service on National Forest System trails, we would tend to manage trails from the very most challenging for hikers, all the way up to these very high-end, huge school groups, paved, etc. The full spectrum for hiker pedestrian, including going off the chart into the next set of, development scales, which would head towards mountain climbing, rock scrambling, mountain climbing. Feet do that. Human feet do that. Similarly, mountain bikes are right in there too. Although we kind of put the brakes on it for National Forest System trails a little bit, because have you guys seen, if you haven't seen in person, you've probably seen the photos of some of the mountain bike challenge courses where they're, putting pieces of timber between trees and really wild stuff. And those things we're kind of categorizing as challenge courses, which really aren't appropriate on National Forest System trails. And if folks want to come and get a permit to build an obstacle course or a challenge course, they can go through their local office. But we're not going to call. I'll get you in just a sec. We're not going to call those National Forest System trails. But mountain bikes do really, some aspects of mountain bikers really do like highly challenging trails, and so they run the full gamut from, if it's appropriate and we can put in a sustainable trail that goes almost to the challenge course but not quite. Bikes span the gamut from class 1 to class 5, which class 5 are the huge hordes of school kids outside of the school on sidewalks type thing. But then what we found is looking through all the rest of our managed uses and design uses, including pack and saddle and motorcycle and ATVs and all the snow uses, they tend to. Now there can definitely be exceptions, but for what's appropriate and what it can be laid in and can be put in as a sustainable trail on national forest lands, they tend to fall within class 2 through class 4, which is really in and of itself a big spectrum, and which definitely brackets the way we've always been managing those uses. So that's kind of an interesting comparison to kind of go, okay. And you'll see that when we look at the data that Dennis is going to show you, when I see in one case hundreds and hundreds of miles of class 1 pack and saddle, I'm kind of going, that's interesting. I wonder if they have that much exception, or if somebody just didn't understand kind of, how, the definitions for the trail class of that. And so we're trying to kind of rein that in so that we have a common language and common application of these design parameters. So,
is the Forest Service the only agency that has the directive to follow these TMOs, or does the BLM, Park Service, National Park
No, we're the only federal agency that I know of that's using TMOs. I know, like, Alaska State Parks are using TMOs, which is very cool. And I've trained several states, and actually I think I'm going to go to the State Trail Coordinators' big annual meeting in June, and they want me to put on a half-day session of this. And so I would imagine, TMOs just make sense, so I would imagine others might be picking this up. I don't know. But if you take one step back, I'm glad you asked that question, the design parameters, these technical specifications, right now the Forest Service is using them. Several states are kind of taking them and adapting them and doing what they do with them. But in terms of the federal agencies, because each of the agencies are so far along and so vested in their management and have their own specifications, we all agreed that we'd part ways at this level. But above this level, in terms of trail class, managed use, and design use, we're all using the same concepts. Mm-hmm. Is there another question? No? Okay. So that's a deal on the design parameters. So we've got trail type, and remember, you've got trail class and managed use, which are the actively managed uses, and then you've got the single design driver or the designed use. And if you combine the trail class and whatever the design use is, you can add those together and it'll get you right down to at least a national set of design parameters, and from there you can write a prescription for your trail. And the prescription might change along the trail, but at least this gives us all a common place to start from and go forward. So kind of rolling through the rest of the TMO fairly quickly here, on the lower right is a place where we have our folks document the target frequency for just a handful of the commonly occurring tasks. There's all sorts of work hundreds and hundreds of tasks that we do on our trails, but this is a commonly recurring set of tasks that occur on most trails. And so you'll see in the detailed instructions it says, write this down or prescribe this in terms of how many times per year. So it might be that maybe to maintain this trail to standard, it really does need to be brushed out once every year. It's in heavy ceanothus, and that's just what it's going to take. And I can look, the other district in the eye and say, that's what I need, and that's what I need budget-wise. Whereas another guy who's got his stuff going through Alpine would say, once every 10 years because there's nothing happening here in terms of brush, and so that would be the prescription. So the common set of tasks are prescribed there. On the back side of the TMO is where the travel management strategies are documented, and travel management in and of itself is like a multi-day training session, which we're not going to do, but once that all gets hammered out, it gets documented here. And note that, this is where managed use is. Managed use wears two hats. There's the hat that I just described in terms of the actively managed uses, but it also, on our travel management plans where we're designating motorized use, it's the managed strategy. So we can kill two birds with one stone when we correctly identify the managed use, and it gets documented here and then populated in our database. And the managed uses, and then likewise the prohibited uses, are documented by a season of use in terms of when would that trail, when does that apply. So in the case of managed use, a trail might be a trail that has a managed use of pack and saddle. Critters can go out there all year long, that's fine, but the user could expect that that trail would be in good shape and available for sustainable use after high spring runoff until through hunting season. So, maybe you put those dates or whatever it is that fits for the trail. So we can get pretty specific with the prescription. Over on the prohibited use side of things, those are, and the instructions explain this, that nothing gets put there unless there's a legal closure order. So if it's legally prohibited, it gets documented. And you see at the top there's the easy one, so if everything's prohibited, you just check that box and you don't have to fill the rest out. Or there's even a blank spot, so if you've got, a Segway is prohibited, you can write that in there. Similarly, on the lower left, there's a handful of strategies that folks aren't required to use, and actually nationally, we don't even necessarily recommend that folks use those strategies. I think there's accept, discourage, and eliminate. But if it makes sense for a particular trail to use one of those strategies, and they're all defined in our handbook, folks can prescribe those. And I'll tell you an example that comes to mind with that. It was on the St. Joe district, and there was an area right up against a proposed wilderness area that actually just should have been, for all intents and purposes, should have been closed to motorized use decades before. But for political reasons, it wasn't. They wouldn't close it. But it's a heavy stock area. And but motorcycles would go in there periodically, and okay. So, but it was perfectly legitimate in that case where the ranger wanted to minimize the motorcycle traffic for a variety of reasons. And so at the entrance to the trail, we'd put rocks and logs and things in such a way that it just wasn't encouraging to motorcycles. That's a discouraged strategy. So sometimes those make sense, and those can be prescribed locally. Continuing over here to the right, this is a place, so hopefully by now you're getting the idea that, gosh, after all the discussing and maybe arguing, I hope not, but whatever happens, but finally the vision gets written down for the trail, you can see how this would be a pretty useful piece of paper after whoever it is who retires and whatever's lost, that, yeah, this is what the intent is for the trail. And so under this special considerations block, this is just where some more of that stuff, that good knowledge can go, that, hey, there's threatened and endangered species, there's a wolf den, we shouldn't do any brushing in there until such and such a date, or whatever it would be. There's a primitive tool rule in effect, and we can't use chainsaws in there. That'd be pretty good to know before you awarded a contract on this, and the contractor thought he could do it at the rates of using chainsaw instead of crosscut. So just places where you can write down, or a place where you can write down whatever it is that's important about this trail for management and construction and maintenance folks to keep in mind. There's a block down here for remarks, and then you'll see in your book, the full TMO's got another whole continuation sheet. And electronically, we have our folks attach photos, attach decision documents, all sorts of stuff. And then finally, down at the bottom of the TMO, there's the signature line. Now, this we're really trying to drive home and get very consistent, and it's in the directives now, that it's the responsibility of the ranger, the district ranger, to sign these things. And so that means that their staff has sorted all this out. This really is the management intent for the trail, and then the ranger said, yep, that's the management intent. It's not a decision, that wasn't a formal decision. The ranger's just saying, yep, this reflects whatever decisions there are, and if there's not decisions, then this reflects the intent, and this is it. And like I mentioned earlier, if a mistake is made, okay, throw this one away or cross it out and reinitial it, and it gets re-signed. But the nice thing with having the TMOs electronically in our database, and we're just starting to get them populated, but I'm pretty excited about it because the rangers can go through and electronically sign them, and the sooner that happens, the sooner it's just absolutely available to everybody. Right now, if you want TMOs, if you guys want TMOs, I mean, you can ask if we've got them electronically, and we might have them, but odds are you're going to have to go to the district ranger's office, say, do you know what a TMO is? Good. And then they're going to dig in file cabinets and make you photocopies. But we're really making a concerted effort. So now as folks document TMOs within the agency, we want them documented electronically. And if we can move forward on getting national requirements on deadlines for when these things are populated by, it'll all just be available, which I think it's just a super useful tool.
David, just a question. You expect the rangers to sign this on the basis of the recommendation of somebody else? Would you expect them to deal with a lot of field to look at it?
You know, it probably, you know, with 142 forests and all this, you know, how many miles of trail, it probably depends, but I think that if the ranger's signing, the ranger needs to stand behind it. Now, if the rangers, say the ranger's new to the district, but say, say Triggs, the trail guy who's been there for 24 years, and Triggs says, trust me, this is it, and I can show you the NEPA document, and I can show you this. Well, not Triggs. It depends on the confidence level, you know. But yeah, the appropriate staff needs to do their work, the engineers need to do their work, and whatever it takes for the ranger to go, yep, this is it. You know, by and large, in an ideal world, I hope all the rangers are intimately familiar with their trails, but that's not reality, so they're going to have to rely on their people. Yeah, but I am really encouraged, Alan, like I said, that we're getting more and more rangers participating in training, which is good.
Well, yeah, I totally agree with you, Jen, you have to sign it. I mean, there is at least that responsibility that he should have. But none of what we've seen in the last few years, I would suspect that most rangers that I know haven't seen 5% of the trails in your district.
So go for it when you talk to Joel. I think it's a good point. The other thing that's in the directives with this is there's a caveat in there that says rangers are supposed to sign these things unless the authority's been withheld at the forest supervisor's level. And I actually don't know why or when that would happen, but maybe somewhere a forest supervisor would go, yeah, we'll keep all that authority within the supervisor's office. So there's a caveat that allows that.
Are any TMOs finished, and if so, how can we access them?
Lots of TMOs are documented. Lots of them are getting scrubbed to make sure they're correct at the local level. You can't access them online directly, but you can request them. And so I'd go to your local office and say, one, do you know what a TMO is? Hope so. Do you have them electronic or do you have them paper? And could we? And you know, and then as partners, and just this conversation that we've been having, recognize, and you'll see in this data discussion, this is the process. I mean, we're training people, and so when you get a TMO, come at it with kind of a constructive attitude, like, this doesn't, I don't understand this, and go back and say, are you sure that this is a 3 or a whatever? Come at it that way, because there's a learning curve. Some of this stuff could be wrong. You guys can definitely provide input. And then there's going to, of course, be sometimes when the number is the number and it's correct from the manager's standpoint and you don't agree. And that's okay, too. But understand that it's kind of a process, and we're trying to bring all these things into play.
Can that number ever change?
Pardon?
Can that number ever change?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the number can change daily, and I don't really mean it quite that lightly, but if somebody wrote down the wrong number, the number can change. Fix the number. If we want to change what the intent is and how the trail's being managed, that happens. And depending on how substantive the change is, it's got to go through public process.
And that's pretty much under the district ranger's discretion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the district rangers, they're the line officers. They're the ones that determine when NEPA, for example, and public analysis kicks into place. I mean, there's hard and fast, regs. There's books on when NEPA comes into place, but it's a judgment call by the line officer, by the ranger, who decides, yep, we've now stepped over this line and we're into this thing. We're not into erasing something and saying John never should have written a 3. That's always been a 2. Yeah.
Will public involvement be present if a TMO changes the trail classification number is being changed? Say it was 3 for 5 years and all of a sudden it becomes a 2, or the potential for being a 2?
Yeah, it depends, and that's a pretty common question, and we push it back to the rangers because, like you'll see when we look at some of this data this afternoon, some of it is just wrong. Somebody who wanted to be swinging a Pulaski was writing the numbers down quick. And in that case, it's just get the right number on there, and that's probably not a public process, as long as we're not changing the management intent for the trail. But if something's being changed, literally changed in a substantive way, it probably needs to go through public process. And so we try, and I think it makes sense for trail managers and trail users, but also taxpayers, we try at the national level not to give a black and white answer, because that could be pretty expensive and kick everything into a huge quagmire process. Ann and I were talking about that kind of stuff last night. But to give enough guidance, and definitely, I think when you kind of wonder about it, is go to the NEPA regs, which are in the directives, and that kind of provides definitely guidance on when something would kick over into public process. But as you guys are helping us provide input and also kind of providing input and questions, come at it from that direction, recognizing, one of our national roads guys, they've got these RMOs. RMOs have been around for a long, long time, road management objectives. And I saw this great, he's a good old boy and he's pretty straight up. And I saw in this email somebody saying, ooh, well, if I'm going to change the RMO class, da-da-da-da. And he just said, you know what? If the number was wrong, if the guy was an idiot who wrote it down, that's what he put in the email. He goes, just fix it. But if we're actually changing the standard of the road, then it's got to go through a public process. So these are just a piece of paper, but a piece of paper that has a lot of useful information in one place. Okay, I promised Dennis that I would keep this moving, so almost wrapping up here. So hopefully you can see TMOs really do pull it together, and every time we go through this training, like I think I mentioned at the beginning of the training, folks, especially like at the forest level or the regional office level, start going, oh yeah, we're going to get the ball rolling and we're going to get going on TMOs because we need them. Because they're just useful. And so once we have a TMO on a trail, which is the point of reference, how are they used? Well, they're applied when folks go out and design and do construction and maintenance. And they're also applied when folks go out and do condition assessments. So I mentioned that we're doing condition assessments annually to go, okay, is this trail to standard or not? And so, like I said, the only requirement we currently have where you have to have a TMO, the only hard and fast black and white requirement for a TMO is before you do a condition assessment. They're called TRACS surveys. That stands for Trail Assessment and Condition Surveys. Before you go out and do a condition assessment, you can't very well go out there and say, this trail's too steep, and I want to build a 3-mile reroute to bring the grade down. You can't really say that unless you know what the objective of the trail is. It's too steep for what? Too steep for a wheelchair? Too steep for a pack string? So we're saying before you can do a condition assessment, you definitely have to have a TMO. This brings us to this last piece where, okay, speaking of field condition assessments, those are really important field inventory tools, but they're expensive. And as taxpayers, and then also talking about that field guide who hardly has any time as it is, when we send them out to do an assessment, we want to make the best use of their time as we can, and our money as taxpayers. And so what data do they collect, and how much is enough? And an example is in 1999 when we started, we got mandated from on high that we're supposed to do condition assessments. We have the full spectrum from folks who drove by in their pickup and said, this trail's fine. I think $150,000 would do it and would be good. And then we had other guys out there measuring every single rock, and I kid you not. So we had the full thing. So how accurate is accurate enough? And that's where this last idea of CHASM came from. And it's an acronym, sorry for the acronym, but it stands for Condition Assessment Survey Matrix. And I'm just going to show it to you real quick. You can take a closer look at it later. But basically, it's a tool so we can gauge, we kind of have our folks gauge how accurate and how specific their survey effort and their data collection is going to be based on, basically, the trail class. So on the high-end trails where we've invested a lot of money and there's high user expectations and usually lots of structures, we need to be a lot more accurate and a lot more specific. And then if you go down towards those GO trails where we don't even have any structures out there, we're going to spend less money, we can be less accurate and less specific on doing those surveys. And so that rolls through in the field data collection, in the frequency and the accuracy of the surveys. Similarly, that comes into the data we've got in the database, because the field data comes in, and so we can tell you much more. If I tell you on an accessible trail, a class 5, that the narrowest point on the trail is 32 inches, it will be 32 inches. So when you get out there a mile and a half with your wheelchair, you don't go, well, it's 28 inches and I can't get through. We're going to be accurate. Whereas on a class 2 trail, we go, well, in general, that trail tends to be about, 40 inches wide. Well, it's going to go like this, and we're not being really specific, and that fits for a lot of reasons, including on those lower end trails, people don't want a lot of hand-holding. They want a sense of adventure. They don't want everything spelled out for them. So similarly, it rolls through the accuracy of the data and then the specificity of the information we provide to the public, too. So that's the CHASM concept, and if you look on page 62, just real quickly, I realize this one might be getting a little technical for some folks. Might be going, yeah, I don't care. But for folks who do care about this, talk to me later. But basically, you can see trail classes are really important. If we have the trail classes identified, then this provides guidance starting about right here where my arrow is on how often we would take a full set of field measurements. And so you can see that on a class 1 trail, we might just take it at major physiographic breaks. So you might take it at the meadow. Here's the grade, here's the soil, here's the everything, and then when you start going up the hill, you take another set. And then as you go up through trail class 3, at least every 500 feet, we're taking a full set of measurements or more often. And when you get up to class 5 trails, those are very expensive surveys. We're taking full sets of measurements at least every 25 feet or every time the grade changes 2% or more. They're very labor-intensive, expensive surveys. And that level of survey actually is consistent with what all the other federal agencies are doing as well on that class 5. But we just can't afford to do that, and it doesn't make sense to do that level on all of our trails. So that's where this CHASM concept came from. Okay, so to wrap up, we got 5 fundamentals. Trail type, trail class, managed use, which are the actively managed uses, right? And then the single design use, which is the single managed use or the design driver that'll get us down to the design parameters or the design specs. Note, we added these little footnotes on here, and so the red diamond means that those are federal trail data standards that the other federal trail management agencies are using. So Park Service, BLM, and Fish and Wildlife Service are also using trail class, managed use, and designed use. And then the yellow little circle means those fall within our FS tag or our Forest Service trail accessibility guidelines. And so that's applicable to trail class and designed use. And in a nutshell, trail classes 3 through 5 are subject to potentially being, they definitely need to be analyzed if we're doing any new construction or reconstruction on a trail class 3 through 5. They need to be looked at for potential accessibility if the design use is hyperpedestrian. And that was a very important filter that we got added in. So that really reined in the trails that are required to be considered for accessibility. It doesn't mean they have to become accessible. There's this whole process. But if the design use, if the design driver is pack and saddle, for example, that kicks it out right there, that trail does not have to be off the get-go. It doesn't have to be retrofitted for full accessibility. And you can look at the... And a lot of that has to do with trying to preserve the intent and the character and the experience of, our vast array of trails. Okay, where to find it? Don't write down that website. That's the internal website. But in the back of your book, there's the reference, and it shows a link, I think, to an external website, which is down. But once the external website comes up, we'll get the word out far and wide. We'll be coming through Mike and Dennis, and so they'll get the word out too. Should be within the next 6 months, hopefully, with any luck. This is what our internal site looks like, and I know the other agencies want this, so they can pull up trail fundamentals, TMOs, etc., etc. So to wrap it up, I thought hopefully by now you kind of are agreeing or can see that trail fundamentals really are cornerstones of effective planning and management. If we can all at least get on the same page with the interpretation and the application, that's not quite so easy, but at least on the interpretation, the easy part, the correct identification and application, we got to work together. Consistent quality data, it's heading us right there. And finally, after all these years, we can say to Congress, this is how many miles we have. Miles by trail class, here's how much we think it would cost to bring the whole thing up to standard, etc. And our confidence level is just a lot higher. So with that, that's trail fundamentals, and you guys are all trained. So give yourself a hand. Good job. Oh, now you can put your hand down if you were swearing the whole time that you were. No, not okay. Is there any questions on fundamentals before we switch? Good?
On trails after fires, is there any set standard of which trail, if they've done the TMO, will they decide if this trail will be reestablished or not after fire or devastating experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I would think that the starting point would be, well, there's a TMO in place, now the trail's been totally trashed by a fire, there's still a TMO, then there probably management would go, well, we're going to keep rolling with the TMO, or they might go, well, let's regroup, and it would depend on, the severity and what's changed. But if they're significantly changing the TMO, then it's got to go through some sort of a public process. That's a good question. Yeah.
Question. Say you, brand new trail construction, is there any incentive or benefit for, say, going, I guess the standard probably, or the most likely trail, the most sought after, be a number 3 for stock use? Is there any incentive to build a number 3 versus a number 2? Obviously the 2 is probably going to be less expensive, less time consuming.
Well, I kind of want to say I hope not, but actually probably if you're building a brand new trail, the line officer and the managers, and if it's a brand new trail, that's going through a public process, all sorts of factors, and of course cost to construct and cost to maintain it, but those are just a couple of the factors. I mean, I think the drivers would be, what's the intended experience? I mean, what are we trying to provide there? What's the purpose of the trail? And that should prevail over this one's cheaper than that one, although the immediate upfront construction cost and maintenance cost needs to be considered, but cost shouldn't be, I wouldn't think should be a driver. It needs to be factored in, but it shouldn't be a driver. There's probably exceptions to what I just said.